Everyone, welcome to this panel under the title of On the Importance of the Solidarity Movement with Palestine, with Yanis Varoufakis, who is an economist and Secretary General and co-founder of the Democracy in Europe Movement 2025, and also the former Greek Minister of Finance.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I wish I was there. Solidarity for where I am, which is an island in Greece. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the Austrian police is not going to try to emulate that which the Berlin police did in April when we were holding our joint Palestinian-Kongress in Berlin. That when I say we, I mean DiEM25 and the Jewish Voice for a Just Peace in the Middle East. You may have heard that 2,000 policemen and some women entered the building, interrupted our Congress, and issued a decree according to which I wasn't
Recording in progress.
Enter Germany, not even by teleconference, as I am entering Vienna tonight. So I hope this doesn't happen to us tonight. But even if it does, we are used to it, aren't we? Comrades, thank you for the invitation. A year ago, this coming Monday, on 7th October, the so far or hitherto successful joint Israeli-American-European project of keeping from public opinion, out of sight, the asphyxiation of the people of Palestine under apartheid and under a slow-burning, cruel ethnic cleansing. And they were successful in doing that. You remember, with the support of Arab governments participating, who will forget the Abraham Accords that Saudi Arabia was very keen to join. That attempt to keep the asphyxiation and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people out of the public eye in the West in particular, but also in the global South, it was succeeding until Monday, the 7th of October. As a result of this rupture on the 7th of October, instead of this silent ethnic cleansing project, which was proceeding for 76 years, 76 years, not 7 years or 6 years, 76 years. Instead of this silent ethnic cleansing project, we have now, for a year, a campaign of outright, loud, and in-our-face genocide, which began under the guise of Israel's right to defend itself. What was the logic of international law? And what did it compel us as humanists to do on the 7th of October? This was a dilemma I had. I found myself in Berlin, and I made a statement to a Berlin media group that led to my being banished from Germany. I think that what every humanist, regardless of one's sympathies towards Palestinians, Jews, Indians, Chinese, Americans, whatever, every humanist who respects international law and the logic of international law had the duty to do one thing, and that is to separate the act of resistance of the fighters who attacked the fence from war crimes committed. And let me be particularly clear on this, because the 7th of October is arriving this Monday. Breaking down a fence that is part of an open-air concentration camp constructed to deny you, your family, your people, basic human rights, and to cause your population within that fence, within that concentration camp, to wither, either through malnutrition or disease or immigration. Breaking down that fence is a duty, not only a right, it is a duty. At the same time, we need to separate that, and that's the sharp contrast I want to make, from violating civilians, Israeli civilians in this case, or even killing Israeli soldiers who are trying to surrender. Even when this is done in the process of breaking down that fence, that is a war crime. Now, Israeli, American, European governments and the Western press along with all the various institutions and interests backing the Zionist genocide project, on the 7th of October kicked into high gear. To do what? To tell us that if we did not condemn the legal resistance of an occupied people, we were de facto supporting the war crimes committed during that resistance. No, we are not going to accept that. They wanted to tell us that if we did not support the right of Israel to commit any war crime of its choosing, we were condoning the war crimes of Hamas. No, we are not going to accept that. They told us that if we demand equal rights for Jews and Palestinians, Arabs, Christians, agnostics, from the river to the sea, that if we demand equal rights for everyone, independently of religion, ethnicity, or belief, that we are proposing another Holocaust for the Jewish people. We are not going to accept this. Because cool, objective heads would hear this wall of propaganda coming from the Western media and from our parliaments and governments and the European Commission, and would reject it as ludicrous. Even liberally minded observers. Exactly for that reason, the Western establishment felt they had to deploy so much noise and they had to spread so much fear amongst the majority. What fear? Fear that if they did not denounce those of us who refused to denounce the Palestinian resistance, that they would be denounced themselves. This is how McCarthyism worked. Most of the people who succumbed to McCarthyism in the 1950s in the United States, they didn't feel like denouncing communists or communist sympathizers. No. They denounced people because they feared that if they didn't denounce them, they would be denounced themselves. This is exactly what's going on now across Europe, the United States, and so on. So here we are. We have a fully fledged genocide, which is being wrapped in a wrapping of self-defense by Israel. But it is now, a year later, beyond dispute. Israel's government has set out to eliminate systematically every aspect of Palestinian life in Gaza. We've seen it. We've witnessed, and I think the whole world has witnessed it, the most intensive bombing of a densely populated urban area in living memory. The most deliberate starvation of a population since the Second World War. The systematic destruction of health facilities, and an unprecedented number of journalists and United Nations personnel killed. The Israeli government has attacked schools, universities, libraries, archives, cultural centers, heritage sites, mosques, churches. Professors and teachers, along with doctors and nurses, have been killed systematically, along with their students, their patients, often entire families. Meanwhile, under the cover of the Gaza conflict, Israeli settlers, protected by IDF soldiers, are evicting Palestinians from their ancestral homeland in direct violation of every principle of international law. The other day, a comrade of mine, of ours, Ofer Kassif, an Israeli Jewish citizen and a member of the Knesset, sent me a copy of a handwritten letter. A letter written by a 10-year-old girl named Rasha. It was her living will. It read, and I feel compelled to read it out. Please don't cry for me, as it would make me sad. I hope my clothes can go to those in need, and my accessories to Rahav, Lana, and Batul. The bead boxes should go to Batul. As for my monthly allowance of 50 shekels, I won't have to go to Rahav, and the other half to Ahmad. I'd like Batul to have my toys. Lastly, please don't shout at my brother Ahmad. Please follow these wishes. A few days later, after an Israeli bombing, Rasha was found dead, with her 8-year-old brother, Ahmad, for whom she had she was so concerned, dead next to her. Comrades, 10-year-old children should not have to think of writing a will. The fact that they do, and then die along with the other children to whom they wanted to leave their toys and their clothes, that is on us. It is on our conscience, especially as Europeans who for centuries allowed for or condoned or perpetrated pogroms against the Jewish people, and who are now, we Europeans, allowing, condoning, or even arming the hands of the Zionist perpetrators of the genocide of the Palestinians. Of course, I would be terribly remiss not to mention the minority, a beautiful, large, but growing minority of activists in Europe and around university campuses in the United States, a minority, growing minority, who have risen up magnificently to the occasion to stop the ethnic cleansing, the genocide. It is because of them, it is because of you in today's hall that Israel is expanding its bombing and its army invasions, today in South Lebanon, tomorrow who knows where. You see, Israeli Zionists, activists who have exposed and are exposing daily the genocide in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank. This is why it is so crucial that we do not let Israel and the Western media disorient us with, I don't know whether you've been watching the news in the last few days, these convoluted analysis of the risks of a generalized war in the Middle East. What will Russia do? What will China do? What will Iran do? What will be the position of Saudi Arabia? All that we can and we must discuss and analyze later, once the genocide is halted and there is peace from the river to the sea, peace with justice. Now, all the talk about the escalation, about nuclear arms, about even the South Lebanon campaign of the IDF is noise that the Israeli authorities are purposely creating to take our eyes off what is happening inside Israel-Palestine, the genocide. We must not be sidetracked into thinking that this is about South Lebanon and that's important to think, that this is about a bad man called Bibi Netanyahu. It is not about Netanyahu. On 19th July 2024, the last July, a few months ago, 19th July, the International Court of Justice ruled as unlawful Israel's occupation of the West Bank, of Gaza, and East Jerusalem. 5 days later, the Knesset voted 65 to 9, a crushing majority, almost the entire political spectrum. They voted to ignore the International Court of Justice's ruling, and provocatively in their decision, firstly they ruled out the possibility even of a Palestinian state, and they described provocatively the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, which the International Court of Justice declared to be unlawfully occupied by Israel. They described it, the Knesset in its crushing majority, described the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem as the land of Israel. To prove further its contempt for international law and the institutions humanity created after the Second World War to support international law, you heard that last Wednesday, Israel's government banned the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, from entering the country. Imagine if any other country had done that. But you see, none of that should surprise us. It doesn't surprise us. But we have a duty to open the eyes of those who are not in the room today, who are not on this live stream, who, they are trying to make ends meet in difficult circumstances for the majority of people in a majority of countries around Europe, if not all countries, and who hear the noise about war in South Lebanon, in Gaza, and so on, and they just don't want to know, and who are therefore susceptible to the propaganda that, okay, you have an Israel there that is trying to defend itself. We need to address them. We need to win them over. This is how the minority, large minority of our pro-Palestinian, humanitarian, pro-international law and international human rights or universal human rights movement will grow. And it will not grow by quoting ourselves to them, to the people who are apathetic, who are on the sidelines of our movement. We have a much, much better chance of convincing them of what the truth is about the genocide of the Palestinian people if we quote prominent Israeli Zionists. Allow me to propose two such quotes. In April of 1956, a man named Roy Rothberg, an Israeli settler, at a kibbutz very close to the fence in Gaza, which existed even back then, was killed by Palestinians who had crossed that fence and had shot him. The next day, during his funeral, the chief of staff of the Israeli army, Moshe Dayan, who later became extremely prominent by being the defense minister, and later, even further than that, he was the foreign minister of Israel. He went to the funeral and delivered the eulogy. The Israeli Times has, a very well-known and respected Zionist newspaper, described Moshe Dayan's eulogy as the speech that defined Zionism. And I think they are right. He said, amongst other things, he began, and this is a translation by an Israeli Zionist, yesterday, with daybreak, said to the gathered mourners, Moshe Dayan, Roy was murdered. And then a bit of a poetic flourish, the quiet of a spring morning blinded him, and he did not see the stalkers of his soul on the furrow. But then he said, let us not hurl blame at the murderers. Why should we complain of their hatred for us, the Palestinians' hatred for the Israeli settlers? 8 years they sat in the refugee camps of Gaza and seen with their own eyes how we have made a homeland of the soil and the villages where they and their forebears once dwelt. Not from the Arabs of Gaza must we demand the blood of Roy, but from ourselves. How our eyes are closed to the reality of our fate, unwilling to see the destiny of our generation in its full cruelty. Essentially what he's saying here is we are settled. We've taken their land. What do you expect? They will kill us. We would do the same if we were them. And he continues, have we forgotten that this small band of youths settled in Nahal Oz carries on its shoulders the heavy gates of Gaza, the concentration camp, beyond which hundreds of thousands of eyes and arms huddle together and pray for the onset of our weakness so that they may tear us to bits. Has this been forgotten? And then he continues a bit later to say that without the barbed wire fence and the machine gun, we shall not pave a path nor drill for water on their land. So you see, comrades, we don't have to say it. Moshe Dayan is saying it. And allow me to just jump to another speech. No, it wasn't actually a speech, it was a discussion between Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, and Nahum Goldman, who's published this in a book, this dialogue. Ben-Gurion clearly states it. And I think it's important for us to reproduce it, because you see, it's very different when you and I say something. And when we quote Ben-Gurion as he's being quoted by an Israeli Zionist historian, Nahum Goldman. And here is verbatim what Ben-Gurion said to Nahum Goldman in that conversation. He said, Ben-Gurion, right? Prime Minister of Israel, a huge giant of a figure in Israeli history. He said, if I was an Arab leader, I would never make terms with Israel. That is natural. We have taken their country. Sure, God promised it to us. But what does that matter to them? Our God is not theirs. We come from Israel. It's true. but 2,000 years ago. And what is that to them? There has been anti-Semitism, the Nazis, Hitler, Auschwitz. But that was the Palestinians' fault. They only see one thing. We've come here and stolen their country. Why should they accept that? They may perhaps forget in 1 or 2 generations' time, Ben-Gurion said. But for the moment, there is no chance. So it's simple. We have to stay strong and maintain a powerful army. Well, and given that 76 years later, the Palestinians are not allowed to forget their circumstances because they are being ethnically cleansed every day, every minute, every hour, Ben-Gurion's analysis is the reason why we have Netanyahu attacking Lebanon. Because the only way you can maintain a white settler, racist project is through expanding it and through continuing to kill the people that you have so far not killed. Comrades, it's very clear. Our best allies at the moment are our Jewish comrades who are taking it up on themselves to fight against Zionism. Comrades like the Jewish Voice for a Just Peace in the Middle East, with whom Mera25 and Dream25, my movement, organized the Berlin conference. Ofer Kasif, the member of the Knesset, who daily fights against Zionism in the Knesset as a voice of one and at huge risk to his own well-being, to his own survival, as a body, as a mind. These are our comrades, because, let's face it, the most acute criticism of the Zionist project came from Hannah Arendt, from Albert Einstein. For people like Ofer Kasif, we have jointly to work to make sure that the act of resistance is recognized as a universal duty for every community in the world, especially for the Palestinians who are now subject to an ongoing genocide. And in order to do this, we have to make sure that we do not allow the Western media to stop you, activists, supporters of universal rights from the river to the sea, from pinpointing, focusing attention on what's happening in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank. Let us not be sidetracked from Netanyahu's and the Israeli apartheid state's attempt to escalate the war so that we don't talk about the genocide and we talk in terms of, journalistic commentating about which platoons of the Israeli army defeated which Hezbollah fighters in what village. That is all important, especially for the people in southern Lebanon, who are the collateral damage of the genocide project, but it is a genocide project which is directed against the Palestinian people. As a European, I feel grossly ashamed of Europe. We have been complicit as a continent to the joint Washington-Tel Aviv project of expunging Palestinians as a living, breathing community, ethnicity, society in Palestine. We have a lot of work to do. Carpe diem. Let's keep fighting for our souls primarily.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Varoufakis, for these important words. I have 2 brief questions. So one question, you touched on the history of Europe, and I want to come back to that. Why do you think has the left historically in the US, in the UK, and other Western European states like France struggled to take a progressive and proactive role in colonial conflicts, such as the French Communist Party in Algeria, or the British left regarding the demands of the Irish, or the contradictory, almost collaborationist role of the US Communist Party in the uprisings of the Black Liberation Movement? Can you, as a leftist, explain this passivity of the left today when it comes to Palestine, with huge parts of the left drifting to the extreme center of European policy?
Allow me to begin with the United Kingdom, with Britain. The answer to your question lies in a turning point where the Labour Party, the leadership of the Labour Party, in the 1920s and in particular 1926, turned against the British working class. So essentially my answer to your question is the moment those so-called leftist parties, social democratic parties, turned against their own working class, against their own people, that's at the same time when they lost any capacity to speak for the oppressed peoples of India, of Palestine, of Cyprus, for that matter, of Kenya, of South Africa, because they became part of the empire project. You will recall that in 1926, a Labour government essentially flipped. And instead of supporting the working class, it joined with the Conservatives to impose austerity upon their own people. And therefore, the Labourist agenda no longer was left-wing. It became a nationalist agenda. Essentially, Labour union representatives were admitted to the corridors of power as long as they didn't challenge the capitalist relations of production in their own country. And they simply canvassed for a smaller distribution of income from the few to the many. At that point, they were admitted into the corridors of power as essentially collaborators in the colonial project, where the colonial project, we have to remember that, included their own countries. Tony Benn, my mentor, if you want, from back in the 1970s and 80s, a remarkable thinker and politician of the Labour Party, who was always in the minority of the Labour Party, put it brilliantly when he said that after London lost its empire, the ruling class, including the Labour Party, treated the British working class as its last colony. I think that concentrates the mind. The communist left has always been on the side of the colonized. Whatever demerits and huge errors and even crimes because I consider myself to be part of the Marxist left, the radical left, whatever mistakes or crimes we committed, we have always been on the side of the colonized. The American Communist Party is a very special case. I remember that it always was split. Parts of it were infiltrated by the FBI. But I have to say, from personal knowledge, members of the Communist Party back then in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s were at the forefront of fighting for the rights of the Vietnamese, for the rights of the Palestinians, for the rights of the South Africans. And they were magnificent.